Betsy and Thomas here, once again from the American Intelligence Media. Today, Thomas, I want you to drop some truth bombs about the JFK files.
Wow. Well, first off, Betsy, what do you think about them?
I think it's really it's a distraction. I think that anything that is worth seeing has probably been pulled from those files long ago, or worse yet, they'll be redacted when we get them. I just think it's a distraction, especially in light of all 5 presidents and Lady Gaga getting together for the hurricane relief concert held recently in Texas. You see, to me, when I saw that, I saw these 5 globalists coming out going, holy moly, the people are onto us. We better look like we are the good guys. But you know, Thomas, I know they're not the good guys because of the research we've done so far and how it all leads back to Dulles and the CIA.
That's right. Not many people know that. Allen Dulles and the CIA. That's basically, if you want to say who killed JFK, it would be fair to say, period, Allen Dulles. Why? He had been fired about 2 years before, and he was given an award, when they fired him, but then they demanded his resignation. Why? Because, let's see, regime change in Guatemala went bad. Regime change in Iran went bad. He directed that. We're going to go back in a minute and talk about historically the CIA, the OSS, and how all of this could even come to be. But let's just talk about what happened with JFK and what they probably will or won't find, because we're going to speculate. But the deal is, we don't need to speculate. We already know who the culprits are. We already have unredacted documents that show exactly who was involved in this situation. So, question is, why did they put Allen Dulles on the Warren Commission to investigate the death of the president, the assassination of JFK, when JFK had come out privately and in writing and publicly stating that he was going to end the Central Intelligence Agency because of its corrupt activity in the Bay of Pigs? Now, if you think about that for a second, who conducted the Bay of Pigs? That was Allen Dulles as the head of the CIA. He was at the head of the CIA for about 8 years, but during that time he worked with, who do you think? The man who just mysteriously they placed as the head of the CIA sometime later. Of course, that would be Daddy Bush. That would be the man who was part of Zapata Oil. Zapata Oil was used during the Bay of Pigs as CIA outposts and as refueling stations and supply stations for the attack on Cuba and the Bay of Pigs, which is, of course, completely failed. It was a terrible attack. George Herbert Walker Bush was the head of Zapata Oil, and it was being used by the CIA. He had been trained how to do that by an oil magnate who had become a man so powerful that he is still behind the curtain, and no one hardly knows anything about Edwin Pauley. But that's who actually took George Bush Sr. under his wing and showed him how to be an agent in the oil world and using that geopolitically through the Office of Strategic Services, which later became the CIA. Allen Dulles was there from the beginning. He was the second in charge of the OSS after the end of World War II. So Allen Dulles was the head of the CIA at that time, and John F. Kennedy said, no, you can't do this. And first off, Kennedy had found out about the fact that George Bush was an agent of the CIA, not only in these regime changes in Guatemala and in now attempting it in Cuba, but in many other places, and in assassinations. They were well known, his predecessor, John McCone, well known for just assassinating the heads of countries as the CIA response to regime change when they wanted it. So George Bush was part of shuffling in money that was corrupt for the presidential elections and for particularly the Republicans. But the oil coming out of South America and Mexico particularly was being hidden in the way that Edwin Pauley and George Bush Sr. did their oil business. Now, at that time, George Bush Sr., during the time of the assassination of JFK, there are already pictures of that are already out that you can look at, just Google it, where you can see a picture of what appears to be Daddy Bush standing on the book repository steps. It's very clear that he was there that day because in the newspaper, and this is also, you don't have to get into the JFK missing 3,100 files, which is a joke. I don't know that they'll ever see them, or that when they see them, they won't be completely redacted, or they won't be complete nonsense, like the Warren Commission. If the government has it, do you think that they'd really just leave it sitting around in the archives? No, each page in that supposed boxes that we've seen pictures of on the internet, of literally on the outside, stating what's inside. Really?
How did they know?
Somebody, reporters came in and took pictures of that, knowing that every page in there is worth, anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 a page to WikiLeaks. It just sits around in the National Archives. No one took it. So no one opened those boxes and replaced them with empty file folders and took the real stuff? How is it, do you think, that we have the documents that I'm talking about? 2 letters. One letter talking about the CIA's response to intercepting George Bush Sr. twice that day. Twice on the day of the assassination of JFK, George Herbert Walker Bush was intercepted. He also there was an ad because he was supposedly giving a talk that day for Zapata Oil, a businessman. It advertises and it says his name, and he's being advertised in the newspaper that day as giving a talk earlier in the day in that city. Well, that places him there, but you can see a picture of him on the steps just as JFK is, coming in that famous turnaround drive where they slowed him down and had the security, his Secret Service, was called off. Just look at the pictures. Look at the video before the ones that they usually show you and always showed us when we were young, and you'll see that the Secret Service is called off of the car. The 4 men who were supposed to be running alongside stop and turn around and go, what? And then they stop. And then the car pulls forward. Who could have told the Secret Service not to do the only job they have? Only their boss. And who would be the boss of the Secret Service? This is the question. We know who the people are. We can name the people who are involved.
Thomas, what's interesting, and Patriots pay attention to this, when all this was going down many, many years ago, George Bush, he was just this guy, working with Edwin Pauley. He wasn't known in the media. There certainly wasn't Google. But now, time has caught up with these thugs. You see, these people now have fame. They have a record. And in the end, it is their fame and their record that's going to take them down. So, Thomas, do us a favor and take them down right now.
Well, ever since George Bush Sr. was in the White House, every president has been a CIA operative, and a CIA indoctrinated operative. And that's just a fact. Barack Obama, and as they went along further, they got worse, okay? Jimmy Carter, what an innocent little peanut farmer they found to run for president, and he happened to win. Why? Because he had more money than the other guy. Where did the money come from? BCCI. What is BCCI? It's a bank in Pakistan that has many branches around the world. It is the Pakistani intelligence agency bank working with the CIA. The CIA has been laundering money through BCCI from its inception. If you go back to the founders, these are all the people who worked alongside of Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles was George Bush's trainer for the CIA. That's the reason George Bush Sr. became the head of the CIA, but supposedly had no record of ever working with the CIA. And then for 1 year becomes the head of the CIA. And, how is it that he's always placed in these sensitive positions? It was he, George Bush Sr., who told Richard Nixon he had to step down because what was coming out with Watergate was not about just listening to the other side's plans for the presidential election. It was about where the money came from for the Nixon election. And it came through who? George Bush. Because he had been trained by Edwin Pauley, who was also an oil magnate, to shuffle money through the oil industries, through pump and dump scenarios, even manipulating stock, crashing their one oil company after the next, trying to compete with Standard Oil. And that was very hard to do, seeing that Standard Oil pretty much had a monopoly. So these are the guys who were so strong, George Bush Sr. and Edwin Pauley that they could compete with John D. Rockefeller.
Before we go further, Thomas, can you explain to people who this Edwin Pauley is? Because that name is not something you run into a lot with the alternative media right now. So take a moment. Who is this guy?
Well, it's fascinating, Betsy. As you know the story, I wrote a story with the help of the conclave, of course, because we don't put out any intelligence that hasn't been ran through the brilliant minds of the conclave. But the conclave and the Anonymous Patriots put out a story on Henry Kissinger, and we thought it was just so brilliant because we named him the godfather of American evil politics, being the basically still to this day the person who runs and manages the Council on Foreign Relations, which determines our foreign policy, which determines our war policy, by the way. Let's make clear about that. So we said that he was like the godfather of evil in America, and a brilliant man who we've now become close friends with, who has helped us so many times, especially on our free energy articles and the push for that, showed us that it was Edwin Pauley who trained Henry Kissinger. So then we had to look into Edwin Pauley, but once you looked into Edwin Pauley, you had to look into Charles Dawes. So this goes back to the end of World War I. And when the basis of the beginning of the revolution to overthrow America was started in about 1913 with the founding of of course, the United States Federal Reserve, which is not part of the United States, and it's not a reserve, and it's not federal. It's a privately owned corporation in 1913. But in 1914, what we saw was an amazing thing. Woodrow Wilson turned to all of the richest men in America, and sorry to say it, ladies, but they were men. These are these were the oil barons, the steel barons, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, all the bankers.
And don't be sorry that they're all men, because just think how wonderful the world is going to be when the women get to take over.
No women would have done these things, but now we are seeing that women like Susan Rice can commit genocide against her own race in Africa.
There are some bad apples there too.
Yes, now there are, because women are trying to be like men to compete in this world that I call the CIA the covert imperialistic army. The CIA and the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, was founded after World War I, and Allen Dulles was there at that time. He became the assistant of that, the second in charge. And at that time, Charles Dawes was put in charge of basically handling the reparations of Germany and basically the world, and controlling the flow of oil, i.e. Standard Oil, Rockefeller, the control of steel, Carnegie, the control of all of the commodities in the world went through one man. And he went, of course, with Woodrow Wilson to the Treaty of Versailles, but of course Wilson is an evil man. We could get into that. We should probably I think we did do one on how evil Woodrow Wilson is.
No, we'll do another audio just on Woodrow, but continue on.
But anyway, he had some very strange people working for him. Charles Dawes was one of them, and he got the control of even working with Russia and how much oil each country would get and how it would be apportioned, and making sure the Standard Oil was a complete monopoly. He made sure all of the American companies were monopolies. And that's where we got this incredible power, even in Europe, and to reapportion the Middle East through the Sykes-Picot part of the Treaty of Versailles hidden meetings. They parceled out the Middle East into very badly reapportioned countries because of oil interests, and that has become the seed of confusion there that has continued as war to this very day. So what happened after World War I set us up for everything that was going on. After World War I, we did it through just a few barons. They started, the League of Nations was started, and then out of that, we have the strangest thing happened. Charles Dawes basically created the international economic policy, especially, economic, because he structured the debt of Germany through the Bank of International Settlement. And that's where the first section of the gold was stolen that later became what we call the rogue CIA gold. After World War I, of course, they stole the gold. But let's remember that this gold was shipped to American banks. It was shipped to French banks. And so as he was controlling the economics of the world and all of the commodities, he actually became a one-man show. But Edwin Pauley did that after World War II. But there was a man called Harry Dextr White. Another person that we barely know anything about in history, but if you look, he was the man who was the American representative for the Treasury Department in economics and American interests during the Bretton Woods Agreement. Remember that, thank heavens, I wouldn't say that. We would have gone to a one world currency had we listened to the British economist who was there at that time, John Maynard Keynes. But we listened and followed Harry Dextr White's advice, which was to set up through the League of Nations, which was becoming later the United Nations, the World Bank, which is completely corrupt, the International Monetary Fund, completely corrupt manipulation of all currencies and all commodities and stocks, and the World Trade Organization, and all of these international organizations that set up what some would say would later become the attempt at the New World Order through George Bush Sr. when he announced it at the United Nations when he became president. So these terrible organizations were set up along with the Federal Reserve. And so basically we were sold into economic slavery after World War I. And so was the Middle East. And so was the reapportioning of those countries so that Rockefeller, Standard Oil, could go in, and others, agents of Standard Oil, would go into Iraq, Iran, and all the Middle Eastern countries and start drilling for oil. And then they owned those oil rights 100% because they owned the rigs and everything about it. They paid a lease, but they basically ripped off these countries mercilessly after World War I. After World War II, let's look at what happened. Hitler's gold, where do you think it went? To the same places in World War I. It came to America. It came to, yes, that's right, Daddy Bush's daddy, Granddaddy Bush. Prescott Bush and Averell Harriman had Union Banking, which was started as Brown Brothers and Harriman, but later became Union Banking. They had Hitler's gold. Not only did they have Hitler's gold, they were charged and convicted for aiding the enemy during World War II. It didn't stop them from keeping the gold. That's why when Daddy Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, was no longer the president, the first thing he did was join the Carlisle Group, which had 400 subsidiaries for war. Haliburton, later KBR, later Z, all these groups came out of Carlisle because it was a weaponized form, a corporate weaponized form that was taking over our government. In Iraq, there were as many private corporate soldiers as there were U.S. soldiers. There were more corporate support than there was military support in Iraq, and that continues to this very day. That was George Bush Sr. who created that.
Well, I can definitely see now where you could pick up that trail with the Carlisle Group and George Bush and run it right through what happened to 9/11. And I know that's too much to get into today because we're really looking at the JFK files. But Thomas, all this is related and everything is pointing to the living person, George Bush, because the other people have now deceased.
It wasn't an accident, as you pointed out, that Lady Gaga had her hand on George Bush Sr.'s soldier. He is the father of, he has carried on this tradition of Charles Dawes, of Henry Dextr White, who was later convicted to be a Russian spy. So the man who created the financial end of the United Nations, which was to be pretty much an effective tool even to this day, and is one of the branches that is already operative of the New World Order, is the economic. Harry Dextr White was a Russian spy. The Russians didn't join the IMF because they knew that it was a trick. And they knew that the World Bank was a trick. They knew that the World Trade Organization was a trick. So, of course, our enemies didn't join. This was an Anglo-American alliance. But remember, the Bolshevik Revolution was part of an Anglo-American alliance. It was John Dawes himself who put the gold on the train.
You mean Charles Dawes?
No, excuse me, Charles Dawes. Sorry.
Yes, okay.
I meant to say Alan Dulles.
Okay,
it was
so
Alan Dulles himself who put the gold in the boxcar and shipped it to Russia to fund the Bolshevik Revolution.
Where did it come from? He put it on rail cars to be shipped, but where did it come from?
Oh, well, we haven't got to that. John Dulles controlled the stolen rogue CIA gold. He was not only the head of the CIA, he was a businessman. So there's a corporate wing.
So is it sitting in Switzerland? That gold? Physically, where was that gold?
That gold was, yes, it was in the Bank of International Settlements and in Union Bank, and then Union Bank moved it to Swiss accounts when Prescott Bush and Averell Harriman were charged with basically supporting the enemy, supporting Hitler. So they had to move the gold around, but Bush himself, Bush Sr., we've got to be very careful about this, Bush Herbert Walker, Bush H.W. I don't know, I call Prescott Bush's Daddy Bush. Then there's, that's Grandpappy Bush. And then there's Daddy Bush, who was just this evil person, but he learned it from his father. Let's not forget that he learned it from his father. And Bush's, Herbert Walker Bush's, George Herbert Walker Bush's brother started in the banking business and was the corrupt bank that helped bring down the USSR. The Prescott Bush banking tradition hasn't ended, folks. It turned into Bain Capital.
Well, worse yet, this is a lineage, an American lineage of the Nazis.
Oh, we absolutely support
because
the Nazis.
Prescott Bush is directly tied to the Nazis. But he was their banker. And then it comes all the way down to the JFK files and why they're being opened now.
We'll see if they are opened. We'll see what's in them, and we'll see if... I do not believe for 1 second that the pictures that you see on the internet are real. That is completely ridiculous. They had to have locked them up because they're worth so much. Because if they are true and if they're not redacted, they'll point at the letters that I've already pointed at. It'll point at the evidence of the day, and the evidence of the day shows that Lee Harvey Oswald was working with Ted Cruz's father as part of the Cuban resistance that was being led by Allen Dulles and was being funded and fronted by George Herbert Walker Bush. This is all a fact, folks. If you don't know this, you didn't do your research.
Well, how come,
it's there now. We don't have to have these files.
Well, how come they haven't opened up some new commission to study this in light of all this information that folks like Betsy has? I mean, certainly Congress can do better than Betsy.
Because anyone who's in the White House has perfect impunity to commit any crime they want.
Oh, you tell me that all the time. They set this operation up just like the Jesuits set up their operation.
Absolutely.
How does that work, Thomas?
Well, there's a superior general at the top, and all of the lowlings, all of the black robe Jesuit members of the Society of Jesus. I speak derogatorily of them because I was one. And
don't worry, gals, he's reformed.
I'm reformed.
He's reformed.
I'm reformed, yes. I'm no longer a man of the cloth.
But it's great to have that because you were really on the inside. I mean, you really knew how this organization worked.
Strangely enough, in my life, I tend to get deeply on the inside of things. But anyway, so the Jesuits have an organization that Hitler, and particularly Heinrich Himmler, praised to the hilt. He said the SS was built upon the system of the Jesuits because it was the most effective propaganda military machine ever created in human history. And it still is to this day, folks. If you don't know that, then we could do we've done quite a few exposés on the Jesuits. But anyway, so some people call the CIA Catholics in Action because they mean Jesuits. I call it the covert imperialistic army because remember, everything that the CIA does, they don't have to tell the president. Because what they're doing is illegal. It's espionage. It's against the Geneva Convention.
Espionage? Well, wait a minute. Who wrote the Espionage Act? Oh, that would be James P. Chandler III.
Yes, and he wrote it to cover patents, too.
To cover his patents, because now as all this patent theft is coming out, I bet you we'll go back to that Espionage Act and we'll read that he covered their butts in there because he's one of them.
The CIA protects the White House by working as an agency outside of America. Up until Barack Obama changed the NDAA and allowed the Department of Defense and the CIA to work within the borders of America, the CIA could not work within the borders of America whatsoever. They used the NSA to spy on everybody, and they had infinite FISA court warrants, or what at that time there wasn't necessary. Those were our enemies. We spied on them. That's what we did. We stole their gold. We stole Hitler's gold. We stole The CIA got a hold of the Union Bank gold, and then Daddy Bush, as soon as he got out, joined the Carlisle Group, and he opened Barrick Gold. Barrick Gold is a front. It's a front for the CIA. Gold stolen from the Germans. And there's gold stolen here in America from the Germans, which was stolen from the French and all the other countries that Germany suppressed. It also had the Japanese gold, which had the Yamashita gold of China and all the other gold from the East. And so this gold was taken after World War II by Allen Dulles when the Office of Strategic Services, he specifically sent 2 people to the Philippines because they had heard the rumors that the Japanese Yamashita gold had been put in caves, and they found it, and that's where that gold came from. No one knows how much gold this is. I can tell you my estimates, but that would make people think this is conspiracy theory. So we won't.
Well, wait a minute, Thomas. Our listeners are pretty savvy. I think they would want to hear what your thoughts are about that.
Well, let's say that it isn't my thought. Let's say I'm going to quote some people, and this is a conservative estimate. For the gold that's been dug up in the world, and the gold that we know is out in circulation, the gold that's been used, and the gold that's in national reserves, that's about half the gold. So there's another half missing. And that's a conservative estimate. Now, I'm not saying that they got all of that. I'm just saying that nobody knows. And that's the reason the CIA, which was already an agency that was extra-national, it became an agency that was in between all countries, foaming dissent everywhere, killing people, regime change, seizing assets, stealing resources, causing wars so that U.S. corporations can go in and steal the assets. This is what the World Bank is. This is what the IMF is. This is what the WTO is.
Also, they had to launder that gold. I mean, if they stole the gold, they can't just put it out on the market. It would look very suspicious. So from what we've dug up, they use this gold to fund these CIA companies.
Yes.
They launder their money through these companies, and we've written about this extensively.
There are 6 major CIA banks that are all international. 2 of them work in America.
All right, Goldman Sachs one.
I'm not naming these
No,
banks.
you're not going to name them.
There are 6 brokers who work for the Fed's New York branch. Those 6 brokers are all CIA. Okay? So the biggest bankers and brokers in the world use this gold. They move it around. They do valuations of their assets. They move the gold around. Sometimes this is just one of their uses, and that's how Deutsche Bank is now still solvent. Because
another bank.
Did you notice that the gold went from New York, I believe it was the New York, what's called the New York Bank, which is one of the 12 banks of the Fed, of course, and it's the number 1 bank. It's the place they do all their business. But I believe it went from there, or it went from the Fed to an unnamed place in Europe, and then right afterwards, the Deutsche Bank was revaluated, or what's called valuation, and they had the assets they needed to be able to continue. Because why? They're one of the 7 banks, 7 to 9 banks, too big to fail, and if they fail, the whole world will collapse. Currency and economy will collapse. Well, those are all CIA banks. So we can name the ones that have already come to the news.
UBS?
Well, UBS is one of them. Credit Suisse works with them, but no, it's HSBC.
Oh, HSBC. People, ding, 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 give you a moment. Who's connected to them? James Comey and Robert Mueller.
Ding, 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 ding. Wait. That's the Justice Department of the FBI. That's collusion.
Again I ask, where are you, Jeff Sessions?
We can get, what we really need to do is to get just about 10 people together in one room and just lock them up at that time.
Why don't just everybody here, look, Thomas and I don't do this for any money. We're just doing it to educate anyone who's willing to listen. When you hear this, send it to the people that need to know this information so we can wrap up all this investigation, put all these thugs in prison, and then let's get back to the business of making America great again.
And, we're out here in the alternative media screaming these things over and over and over and over and over and over again. So much of what you hear us say is a repeat. Why? Because we're going to repeat it until the mainstream media has to acknowledge it, because if they were true journalists and they hear it being screamed and everyone knows and they don't bring it to light,
Thomas,
then they look awful.
I don't care if the mainstream media gets it or not. People are not listening to them anymore. Now, we can't see the empty stands like we can right now with the NFL, but patriots understand who the globalists are, how they operate, and they're choosing to turn it off. I would rather see Congress get to the plate and do their freaking job. I'd like to see Jeff Sessions get some indictments out there. Robert Mueller, my God, you just showed how he works all the way back to HSBC and how it's tied to all this gold and George Bush and that whole globalist group of presidents sitting up there with a Satan-loving gaga. I am sick and tired of it. I want them to be indicted. I have children. Ladies out there, we have children. We have families we need to raise. We need to make America great again. And we cannot do it with this criminal class of thugs in Washington. And once we take down Washington, Thomas and old Betsy, we're going after the Vatican.
This is 100 years we're fighting, Betsy. This is a war that's
been
going on for 100 years.
Yes, but we have people out there now who are joining us.
Yes, we do. And they are in an old tradition where the corporate wealthy control the inside of the government. They control the military. They control intelligence now. Let's look at one tiny issue. The reason James Comey can act with absolute impunity is because he's in a 100-year tradition of the FBI, the CIA, the NSA covering up for the White House, covering up for their criminal connection to corporate. So James Comey put a gag order on the businessman who was the witness that turned on the Russian trucking magnate and the Russian banker in America that then caused the Uranium One to finally, after it was in 2 books and a movie, to come to light to the news, where they're not ignoring it now. It's because some citizen journalist did a FOIA and caused that to come to light in the strangest way, so that man says, we don't even know his name, he says, I would like to testify, but James Comey put a gag order on me. That is illegal. And he cannot put a gag order on a case that is over.
No, and Jeff Sessions could lift that in a heartbeat. And if he can't do this one thing, then Mr. President should consider firing him.
Well, remember what they did to JFK. They killed JFK because he wanted to end the CIA. So let's remember, the CIA is not legal. The CIA...
It's not constitutional.
It's not constitutional.
We need to get rid of it. And the Federal Reserve is not constitutional, and nor is the IRS. All they do is intimidate citizens of this country.
Those are some of the 12 steps of the 100-year takeover of America, which we have written about again and again. And with Trump being elected, those things are being knocked down. The first one needs to be knocked down is the United Nations. Now, we would say knock down the CIA, but here's the deal. The CIA has been trumped. Now, the National Counterterrorism Center trumps the Counterterrorism Center in the CIA. Now, that means, that, first off, the CIA are espionage, subterfuge, liars, stealers, murderers, propaganda, and every bad name that you have. They were created during the war to fight our enemies when they had no morality whatsoever, and this was supposed to be saving America. This now continues to this day. It is a military organization that does not need under any circumstances to work in America or to work against any country that has not been called by the U.S. Congress an enemy of the United States of America. And at this point, Russia is not one. At this point, we don't have one. The 7 countries that Obama bombed, those aren't even called our enemies. Those are just coalition agreements to bomb somebody.
Thomas, we do have an enemy, and it's right here within the United States, and it's these organizations that have taken over the Constitution.
They're transnational CIA, corporate, and we call them rogue, and they're directly linked to the White House since the time of George Bush Sr., but before that, it was linked to the Secretary of State, usually, the Department of Treasury, and also that's where, like, Alan Dulles' brother John Foster became a Secretary of State. They became, or national security advisors. They end up telling the president what to do because the president is out for one thing. One thing, those that group of ex-presidents on the stage with Lady Gaga One thing is absolutely for certain. Only one thing. They're only concerned with their own personal greed. Period. That's it. When you go to corporate CIA and you go to the Carlisle Group, when you go to Barrick fake gold, when you use the bullion vault, just like they did with the Nova Scotia Bank and Makata recently, they looked in there and they said, oh my gosh, there's no gold in the largest gold trader in Canada, but they're the largest gold trader in the world. Oh, there's no gold in the vault of the largest gold physical trader in the world, except for the Chinese fake Shanghai physical gold lie, which we exposed recently. So when you're talking about the corruption, it is on a high level, and you can't stop it unless you have lawsuits that put people in jail. Look at what just happened to J.P. Morgan. They ripped off $5 billion from American people who held mortgages in their homes. They took $5 billion from Americans. They had to pay, or they took many billions of dollars. They had to pay a $5 billion fine. They only paid $1 billion. And the other $4 billion, they did a trick to get out of paying it. That's what we work with. Now, does Trump even know that happened? Who can say? The president isn't necessarily made aware of what the CIA or the counterintelligence group or now the counterterrorism group or the National Counterterrorism Group. The second that 9/11 happened, thank you, Robert Mueller, who did no investigation on it. And if we want to talk about the JFK Warren Commission investigation, look at its exact image. Its exact image is the investigation done on 9/11. Nothing was investigated.
Thomas, what we're really saying here, I think, is the JFK files, it really is just going to be a big distraction, because if you can't find the truth in everything that was just said here in the last 30 minutes, you're not going to find anything in the Warren Commission files, because it would have long been removed or never reported in there.
They have redacted pages where the entire page is redacted.
Well, that's just bullshit.
Now, let me just tell you a couple more things about our lovely president. And the deal is they realized in the CIA, the bigger the lie, the easier it is to get people to believe it. So when the head of the CIA ran for president and people said, does anyone know anything about his past? They said, here's his resume. And you'd open it up, it was a blank page. George Herbert Walker Bush hid his past so well that during the election, not one speck of evidence came out.
Wait. That sounds like what happened with Clinton and Obama. They never have a past, and the media never wants to look into it. I mean, really, Obama and where he was born, that could have been solved early on and kept us from the misery we are faced right now with a collapsing economy, healthcare that doesn't work, and a military-industrial complex gone rogue.
Obama sealed his files exactly as the Warren Commission sealed the most sensitive pages of what it researched, okay? When do you think Obama will unseal his files, which would reveal exactly everything you just said? When do you think they'll actually reveal the truth about the Warren Commission? When do you think they'll actually tell the truth about 9/11? Why don't we use the torture techniques that both Comey and Mueller at different times and Rodstein and McCabe have all supported on them and find out the truth? We need to do some waterboarding on individuals in America because they hold the truth. Mueller holds the truth of 9/11. He saw Tower 7 fall in its footprint and didn't even investigate it. This is unbelievable, but it's in the history of Charles Dawes. It's in the history of the Russian spy.
It's in the history of the Jesuits, because the Jesuits can do anything they want, including murder, and they get, what is it called?
Impunity.
Impunity. They can do that. And this is, if the CIA was set up that way, then they can do it too.
They just let a priest who was charged with raping girls terribly young, I think 30 of them. He was being tried in America. They recalled him to the Vatican, and because the Vatican is a country unto itself and has no extradition, any of their pedophiles can go there and be protected for the rest of their lives. And this man was one of the evilest looking priests I have ever seen, and he is now free, and he doesn't have to answer for his sins, just like the elite do not have to answer for their pedophile sins.
Well, as long as citizens stand down, but we're tired of it. We really are tired of it. Now, what do we need to do, Thomas? What do we need to do to get Congress and Washington to do its job or get the hell out of town?
Well, 911 Truth tried to do it, but they failed. We need people like E.P. Heidner to come out and state what really happened at 911 and write up an indictment. If you take his report, it is an indictment. And George H.W. Bush and George Baby Bush. They will go to jail. So will Cheney, the man who actually conducted...
Do we know if H.P. Heidner is still alive, or if that was a pseudonym for the report that he gave?
We don't know. He wrote 2 small reports afterwards. But a man who could write such a brilliant report, who then wrote nothing afterwards, and was an absolute brilliant, one of the most brilliant economists I have ever read, and documents his stuff so well that you don't need a lawyer. You need Heidner's report, and these people will go to jail. And there are many crimes involved with 9/11 that you don't even know about. George H.W. Bush, as vice president, used illegal Brady bonds to economically attack the USSR. He brought down the USSR, but for his own purposes and for the purposes of his group. And that group included Henry Kissinger. It included Dick Cheney, himself, his lawyer, James Baker.
So why is Trump meeting with Kissinger?
Because you always want to keep your enemy closer than your friend. Kissinger is the enemy of all Americans, and basically there's no country in the world that there aren't people who consider Henry Kissinger to be the enemy of their country.
That's
because
probably
of what
why
he's
he
done.
can't leave his house, is because his head's wanted by all these countries.
I've only seen him come out a few times in years, and it's to places like the White House or places where he's well guarded. Yes, he's well guarded. But Henry Kissinger is fading because, of course, he's got his family coming forth and the people that he's chose to carry on. And remember, it was the Jesuits who created the Council on Foreign Relations. And they created it as the twin to the Round Table of the City of London and the Fabian Society. And it was to control America. It wasn't to help America. The CFR has never helped anyone except the people who come to their meeting, who are military warlords who want to get into the corporate world and get their piece of the pie, and corporations and horrible lawyers and stuff. For instance, when we started off, you had to have someone in control of commodities, particularly oil at that time. Now technology is another one that has to be added. But Charles Dawes controlled oil. His brother controlled banking and controlled the mega rich, the elite, and the bankers and the brokers. And then they are the ones who set up in 1913 the fall of America. There are 12 steps, including what you mentioned. The IRS is illegal. All the things I mentioned earlier, the IMF, the World Bank, the participation in the BIS, all of these things are illegal, and we've joined them. And the Bretton Woods Agreement are illegal. All these things go against the U.S. Constitution.
And what about the Highlands Forum?
Well, the Highlands Forum is ran by Andrew Marshall, who's as evil as Henry Kissinger, because he created the weapons of our modern day age. They created nuclear deterrent, they call it. No, that's a nuclear race with Russia, who's never been our enemy, and we gave them what they needed to keep up in the race. So he was the man keeping this up and keeping up the facade. That's the reason Bannon met with Kissinger and then met with Andrew Marshall. And that's the reason that Trump then met with Kissinger the second time and probably secretly met with Andrew Marshall. And they were asking him, what about China? How much have they stolen of our intellectual property? How many of our patents do they have? How many of their microchips are in our weapons that they have backdoors and can turn everything off? Do we have to be worried about their economic war? And do we have to be worried? The number one concern isn't even about nuclear deterrence, because, as I just said, that's fake. North Korea, we can wipe them off the map tomorrow before they ever launch anything. We can shoot anything out of the air. We can use accelerated particle beams to blow them up on the pad. It's all a big joke. That's China's megaphone. And so when we're dealing with North Korea, we're dealing with China, and we're at a war with China. But the big war is not in military weapons. That's where they sell a lot of stuff through the Secretary of State, Hillary now being the number one arms dealer of all times. When she was Secretary of State, sold more arms than anybody else in history. And that's what we do. But what we really do is currency control. And the U.S. Treasury is where it's all at. And when they spy on people, they can do it with absolute impunity, because when you even do a bank account, it sometimes goes out of the country and comes back on the internet. So that's a wire fraud. That's international fraud. And they can get you for taking money out of an ATM machine. Trust me, because they can say it goes out of the state and out of... All they have to do is say it goes out of the state, but if it goes out of the country, they can call in the big guns.
Okay, people, we have two choices here. We're either going to lay down, give up, and let them take over, enslave the world even more than they have, and call us and use us and rape our children and take away our financial ability to earn a living. I mean, it is a dismal future. That is one path. And the other path is you got to get off your butt right now and you've got to do something. You know, we're baby boomers, Thomas and I, and we know there are a lot of baby boomers out there. You're going to be feeling the real pain of when the pensions start collapsing. And when they start collapsing, don't be pointing your finger at Donald Trump. This is the crew right here, we've named them all, who have kept you from a nice retirement because their whole system is going to collapse. So what you can do, and you can do this from your armchair, you can gather up these truth bombs and you can start lobbing them all over the place. You need to use your Twitter the way the president does. You need to use email. You need to use Facebook that they're using to weaponize against us. Citizens, you need to pick up the arms now, and these arms are information truth bombs, and you need to start lodging them. Now, where are you going to get this information? No, Thomas, this time Betsy's going to talk. Now, where are you going to get this information is you need to go to our site, the American Intelligence Media, aimfortruth.org, because in there you're going to find dozens of citizen intelligence reports that are going to give you the dirt on how all these thugs have been operating for decades. Then you take whichever citizen report you want and you send it to Senator Grassley. You send it to Rand Paul. Send it to the senators and the representatives like that Mike Kelly. He was on fire the other day taking down the IRS chief. These are the people that need to have this information in their hands. Then you need to educate the people around you. Yeah, even your children whose faces are glued to their iPhones. You need to start educating people in the way that they can receive it. Now, not everyone is like you that can receive the information we just gave you here that's so incredibly detailed. But maybe it's enough just to show someone that the H.P. Heidner files already exist and already explain why 9/11 happened. Or maybe it's something about, Facebook theft by Leader Technology. But you now have a responsibility as an American patriot to start lodging these truth bombs until we take them out. All right, now I'm done.
That's right. And the reason that we're so excited is because we are there. Paul Revere has gone out. The redcoats have arrived. The battle has been engaged. And so we aren't alarming you early. We're alarming you because now is the time. Trump is the new George Washington. And all you have to do is take Thomas Paine's pamphlets, which actually are the number one thing that caused the colonies to congeal around each other, and the meme of Benjamin Franklin of the snake cut into 13 parts that said, "Join or die." That's where we're at again, folks. This is an American revolution. And if you don't know it, you are not paying attention. Trump can simply do the 12 things that we've recommended. He's already started. We think he's either on the same path with us, thinks the same way, or he's reading our intelligence. Here's what we told him to do. Here's what he's done. We said, get out of the UN. Oh, he now totally took us out of UNESCO, said he's defunding the UN by half. We said, audit and seize the Federal Reserve, take the assets, and let them go bankrupt. He has said repeatedly that they need to be audited. We have said repeal Glass-Steagall. He has said it needs to be repealed. We have said, by the way, when you get out of the United Nations, we also said get out of the IMF, get out of the World Bank, get out of the World Trade Organization. Those are three more things. You get out of the UN, you automatically get out of those. Get out of the Bank for International Settlements. That's why derivatives exist. Get out of that. Get out of the stock market and disallow the gambling and or charge them a tax. That tax would be enough. It would be more taxes than are gotten from all Americans.
Plus, Michael McKibben has a great plan for a win-win situation on undoing the harm that was done to all of us with the theft of the technology that went into Facebook.
Oh, absolutely. Seize MERS and give all the mortgages back to everyone. Instead of starting a land bank, make the bank Americans. Anyone who has a home and land gets to keep it because they have been manipulated. They have been lied to. That's where the assets go back to us.
And then put them all on the blockchain and get rid of these middlemen, these corrupt middlemen. You can put mortgages now and preserve the integrity of that or anything, any asset on the blockchain.
We have to stop the centralization of all things, especially when it goes to a single computer.
And hello, the Catlins, they are amazing people out there, because that's what they're doing. They're standing up and they're saying, no, we're tired of the centralization and the roll up of the globalists. It's stopping right here. And they are creating a human chain right now at their borders to keep the Spanish out.
The EU is over. They have been invaded. So right now, what are they doing? The same thing that our Fed did. Print tons of fake money. They're printing money, trillions of dollars. What was it? 2 trillion just the other day. They're printing trillions of dollars like we do. So when we stop the Fed and we stop the manipulation of the Treasury, then we go back to a solid currency, a currency based upon a basket of precious metals and other things. And we stop the cyber warfare against Americans. We end all corporate intelligence, period. We end all corporate support of the military, period. The military is there to support the president. The reason we are out of control is because the president's reach has become so far that a Woodrow Wilson, though we did not join the League of Nations, still got us into the United Nations and got us into the IMF, the World Bank. All the evil was because of bad presidents that are not being checked. We need to look at all presidential executive orders and the fake ones that Obama invented, policy directives and the other 3 types that he created. We need to review all of those, probably stop all of them. We need to decrease the federal government to almost nothing. We need to stop the IRS. It should not exist. There should only be a sales tax. When you have the money and you're spending it, you pay it. Otherwise, if you make money, to tax that is simply evil. So the IRS, as Betsy pointed out, needs to be ended. The Selective Service needs to be ended. And the CIA needs to be ended, as well as the National Counterterrorism Center, Homeland Security, which is nothing more than the
They're
SS
brown
in
shirts.
America.
They're brown shirts and blue shirts.
So we've outlined the plan. He started on all of those. So, folks, be encouraged. The reason we get so excited is because we are seeing that the deep state, the bureaucrats, the greedy misers who stay in these political positions for all of their life until the day they die, wheeled into the Congress, Alzheimer's, they don't know their name, they don't know the state they represent. Oh, did I mention John McCain?
No, that was Nancy Pelosi.
Or did I mention any of those people who literally don't know where they are sometimes, and yet they continue the same evil that Alan Dawes, Harry Dextr White, Edwin Pauley, and Kissinger all taught to their best student ever, and that was George Herbert Walker Bush.